Okay, so we are on our sixth video for the cylinder drawing. I did a lot of the sort of fill-in shading off camera, and now I am sitting back and looking, seeing what needs to be touched up and revised, and we'll do some of the final details. So as I'm sitting back, I'm noticing, you know what, I think maybe I don't have smooth transitions everywhere up here. So I would continue working on this with whatever tools have been working for me. So trying to create that kind of smooth transition gradation with dark to medium to dark again. So layering materials and marks, pressing harder to get the darker value that I want. Notice I'm being very, very careful at this point not to smudge the page. And I can use many of these different materials, so using my ebony pencil, so we don't want to see any kind of lines or big jumps. We just want all of these to be gradations. So gradual changes. And that's what you keep having to kind of sit up and look and see, you know, what kind of impact are these things having. I don't necessarily want to use my blending tool everywhere because having a little bit of these sharper edges, these grittier textures, those really add a lot to a drawing as well. So yes, we're going to blend in some areas, but don't overblend. It's really easy to overblend. All right. So again, really carefully. My fingers are dirty at this point, so really carefully kind of working on this. I'm noticing some transitions in here that need to be smoother. So again, using now my eraser as a drawing tool. So side to side little hatch marks or even stippling. So that, again, we've got this smooth transition. Looking at this, seeing, okay, how is this looking? This is what I was trying to do with this white at the edge. I'm not sure that I really actually love it, so I'm going to add a little bit of shading in here. So darkening up some of this area behind it just a little bit so that I can then still have a contrast and get this little bit of shadow as this curves around. So a little bit of shadow at this edge of the cylinder, even though the light is hitting it on this side. And then making sure that you get that smooth transition, so hopefully no bumps as you then go into the part of the cylinder where you're shading on the cylinder. And just continuing to work on that until you've got a smooth transition there. Getting in there so you can kind of see how that's looking close up. So again, I'm doing enough shading vertically to connect, and then switching to my horizontal really flat, because in the negative space here it's the flat table. So just continuing again, looking at all of these areas really closely. Still looking at the cylinder as well. So once I'm satisfied with this, then I would work on these little finishing details. Okay, so I did a little bit more of that touching up on screen, off screen. I used both my eraser and my blending tool, kind of went back and forth, getting this area smooth and even. As I sat back and held it up, I also noticed, you know what, I think I need to get just a little darker in this area, so rather maybe than going to the pure white in as much of that, maybe closing that in just a little bit so that there's just a hint of the white and more of that very, very light level 2 gray in there. All right. And then I'm going to be ready to add the very last details, which are adding these lines, which are actually little grooves in the cardboard. So a couple of things with this. People tend to make these too curvy and too dark. So I'm going to work with my HB or maybe even my 2H pencil to do these. And I'm going to notice, where does this start? So I think it starts maybe right here. And then where does this end? So start and end. Where do I think that is? Maybe it's right there. I'm going to kind of visualize that line before I draw it. And then I'm going to notice it only curves a tiny, tiny bit right here. Sometimes I'll recommend that you might even make sort of a straight line and then another straight line, but you do want them to connect. So maybe just really, really light there. Okay, so I put in, so again, I'm using my paper towel, and I put in maybe a little bit of an angle, and then an angle this way. So very, very subtle curve, and very light, and it's actually, like I said, it's a groove, so we actually kind of have the top side and the bottom side, and the top side is casting a little bit of a shadow. So we're doing this just really thinking about the form. And kind of shading that, so very, very light. And then as I pull out and look at more of this again, so looking at where does this next line start, so starting here, ending here, finding those areas, so maybe it's right there, and then maybe it's here, and thinking about, okay, as I go across that line, might be a slight line there, and then maybe it turns a little bit and angles, then maybe angles, and then angles. So we think about those as, what was that, maybe 4 different angles. So starting on either side. Again, looking at where we want to start and end. Visualizing that. And then very lightly sketching that in, so you kind of have that angle, and then it's going to turn a little bit, an angle, and then maybe a little bit more, and then as we get to that very, very end, it's angling the other way. So I've drawn this really lightly, you can't even see it in the video. And maybe you're even putting your pencil over it and just imagining where you'll draw before you draw. So even as I'm making that darker, it's still pretty light. And then finally making it a little bit darker. So we're keeping this really, really light though in comparison to the rest of it because it's these really small forms. And then I am doing this second line underneath it because it is in fact this groove. So we have these 2 edges. And notice how I'm getting even lighter as I go into the light area because it's about contrast, right? So here you can see it more even though it's actually lighter. Here I may be pressing harder, but you don't see it as much. And so I can actually switch pencils as well. So to see it, I may need to make that a little bit darker here. And if it disappears, that is also fine. So if one side is going to be darker than the other, it'll be that top edge that may be a little bit darker where that's casting the shadow. If you want to see it a little bit more in here, you could very, very lightly along that edge, just barely touching the surface, use your eraser to stipple a little bit, just a tiny bit, just so you can see that a little bit more. So again, it's about the contrast as much as it is about the absolute value. So it's relative value. All right, and then we've got our very, very last one down here at the bottom. Again, we're going to look, where does this start? Where does this end? And how are these angles? So we've got kind of an angle, and then an angle. So 3 angles kind of connecting. We don't want that to be too extreme, either curvy or too extreme angled. So we need to find that happy medium. So again, looking to see where we start looking to see where we end, or vice versa. And we've got kind of that angle, and I'm looking as I draw, angle, and final angle there. So they're creating one curve, and yet it curves at sort of a different speed, if you will, as you go. And then going in there, you make that top edge a little bit darker, put in a bottom line parallel to it. So notice it's very, very light where the shadow is not there. And then in this darker part, we may need to make it a little bit darker to see it, but not much. We want low contrast. All right, and finally, I'm going to sit back, hold this up, hold this where I can see it. So if you're at your table, you're now picking up your drawing and you're holding it out at arm's length so that you can see it. All right, and this is the point at which you're looking at these parts you just drew. So maybe a few touch-ups to that. So I'm standing up as I work so that I can see those accurately as I work. So it's kind of like I'm holding it out, but instead I'm standing up. So, and again, I'm fixing little areas that I might see that maybe things aren't as smoothly transitioning as I want them to. This would be the time then to take a photo of your work. Look at the photo, see if you notice some things in the photo that you didn't notice in person. This may be a time to ask someone sitting near you who you trust, is there something here that you think I need to work on a little bit more? And then, of course, check in with me as well. So you can check in with me to see if I have any final areas that I think you need to work on a little bit more before you hand that in. Before you hand this in, by the way, the whole time you're revising, you're using your reference. Before you hand this in, so if I decide, okay, I've photographed it, I've looked at the photo, I've touched up everything I need to touch up, then I'm going to turn this over. I'm doing it carefully, making sure I don't get fingerprints on it, looking to see if my table's dirty. I'm not having that stuff on the table smudge it. And then, of course, I'm going to write my name, which you can't see. But trust me, I'm writing my name. Here we go. Writing my name, lower right-hand corner. And then you would put your bell. And take your final photo of what the very finished piece looks like after your revisions. You're going to put that final photo, you'll crop that, so because this is a finished piece worth 100 points, you're going to crop it so that we don't see the table at all. When you're doing that, to get a good photo, you have to make sure that your camera is level to the picture plane, so this should look like a rectangle, not some sort of wonky, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? It escapes me, but not a wonky shape. Instead, make sure it's a rectangle. Crop it inside the edges of your picture so that we don't see the table at all. And then you'll also be turning in the finished artwork very carefully over on the shelf. I will actually spray these with a fixative because they will be smudgy and they will get stuff on your fingers and they might get messed up and they might mess up other people's drawings. So all of those, for all of those reasons, I will spray a fixative on these to protect them before I hang them up. All right, and as you can see, I'm still working on my revisions. I'm still seeing places that I think I want to touch up a little bit. So take your time with those revisions. And thank you so much for all of the hard work that you've been doing on these drawings.